I've been having a go with the career mode in Microsoft Flight Simulator 2024, and obviously I've been focused on the helicopter career path. And you're probably thinking that by now I would have completed it. Well, besides my busy real-world schedule, there have been a few game-related issues holding me back. I'll get into those as this video goes on, but so far I've unlocked the Cadbury G2 and Airbus H125 for use in missions. And in terms of missions, I have Flighseeing, passenger transport, and search and rescue. So that's what we're going to look at here. While recording the flights for this video, I also unlocked the ability to start my own company, so we'll have a quick look at that at the end as well. One last note before we get started is I didn't have any engine sounds for any of these flights. I usually get them on the G2, but not always, and I don't think I've ever had an engine sound for the H125. Asobo, I know you've got a lot on your plate at the moment, but it'd be real nice if we could hear our aircraft. Thanks. Anyway, onto the missions. This is the first mission type you'll have available for helicopters, and can be done in the G2 or H125. The format is fairly simple. Passengers board the helicopter, you taxi, take off and fly to some points of interest where you do a low, slow orbit, so the client can gush over the view or criticize you if you get it wrong. Sometimes the taxi path can be quite long, so time to brush up on those hover taxi skills. There are some tips in my helicopter basics video if you're looking for pointers. Be careful with the flight paths marked out by the floating blue gates. They do occasionally get pretty close to the ground, and if you follow them, absolutely, you'll need to do some pretty aggressive climbs and descents, which will be bad for the aircraft and your passengers' stomachs. They should be considered more guides than an absolute path you must follow. The primary thing you need to keep an eye on when orbiting a point of interest is your airspeed and altitude. The airspeed needs to be below 70 knots, and you are awarded points for how good the flight-seeing experience is. I'm not sure exactly what metrics are used to determine this, but I've found slower is better. But for safety's sake, it's best to keep your speed above 40 knots. Once you've been round all the POIs, it's return to base, land, taxi, and shutdown. If you've done well, the client will be keen to fly again, and the employer will be happy and you get paid. Generally, I quite like these missions. They're fairly chilled, not too long, and you get to do some interesting flying and explore places you may not necessarily think to fly around otherwise.
I can see why the client is happy. You offered him a fantastic session. Definitely something to repeat.
In order to unlock different mission types, you first have to do the relevant gold mission. This was one of the biggest blockers for me for this mission type, as my gold passenger transport mission was bugged. For starters, ATC wouldn't give me clearance to taxi as the airport was currently IFR. I was able to get round this by skipping to takeoff, but this incurred a penalty for entering the runway without clearance. Then when I got in the air, when I got within 7.03 nautical miles of the destination, the game would crash to desktop, in the same place every time. I tried loading into the destination heliport in free flight, and it also crashed immediately, so I came to the conclusion that that area of the map was bugged, but that left me no way to complete the mission. In the end, I resolved this by deleting a file from my Steam user data, which I'll cover in a subsequent video. But eventually I unlocked the passenger transport missions, and I hate them. I've not had one that isn't bugged. Usually it's the case that the quick comms in the mission objectives just stop working, which means the only way to progress is to go ahead and do things without clearance, which affects your score and reputation. And in case you're wondering, no, it doesn't work if you bring up the comms menu and do it yourself.
Kilo Juliet, Alpha Quebec, traffic November, tree 429er, 2 taking off runway, 1 west departure.
Even if ATC gives the correct response, the mission objective doesn't update and you still get penalized. But these are all troubleshooting issues that I'm sure our friends at Asobo are collecting feedback on and will resolve in time. Hopefully. The main thing I don't like about these missions is that they're boring. Take off from here and fly in a straight line while your passenger has the same phone conversation as all your previous passengers, which, by the way, if you've ever been in a helicopter or other light aircraft, you'll know. If you're not wearing a headset, you can't hear anything other than the engine. There is no way you could have a conversation on a mobile phone. Then when you get to your destination, you just have to land, taxi and shut down, which you'll be penalised for because the quick comms aren't working. The payout is better than the Flighseeing, but it's not worth the hour or so just flying in a straight line. If I wanted to fly straight at an altitude too high to see anything interesting, I'd be flying a plane. This may get more interesting later if you have to land on buildings in cities and such, but as it currently is, it's pretty dull. This strikes me as a mission type with some great potential, and I really enjoyed the gold mission to unlock it. Essentially, the formula is take off, fly to a search area, then, as the name suggests, search for the person who needs rescuing. Despite being told to look out for an orange backpack, there's usually orange smoke to help you find your target, but it can take a while to find it. However, once you've found your target, there is an issue. After completing the gold mission, the other two search and rescue missions that have been made available have been impossible to complete because there is nowhere to land near the target. I presume these missions are procedurally generated, and a random spot within the search area is selected for the target, but it apparently gives no consideration for the terrain or flora. Obviously, in a real-world scenario, you can't guarantee that someone will need rescuing from a convenient location, but in those circumstances you could use a hoist or land nearby and send a team on foot. But in the sim, the hoist comes in a later qualification, which I do now have, but you have to complete 10 regular search and rescue missions before you can do the hoist missions. Alternatively, a real-world pilot could land nearby and send a team in on foot, and although we can now walk around, I assumed you had to land near the target, because that's what the mission objective said to do. However, I later saw someone post online that they had managed to complete one of these missions by landing further away and walking to the target. When I attempted to test this for myself, though, this happened. I thought this was quite amusing at first until I had to Alt-Tab out of the game. A couple of hours later, I loaded the sim up again, and the helicopters appeared to remember how gravity worked, so I tried the remaining mission to see if I could walk to the target. However, there were trees literally for miles. I eventually found somewhere just over a mile away, so I started my hike. As I was enjoying my stroll through the woods, this happened. Despite still being in the search area, you apparently can't stray too far from the helicopter, and again the mission was failed and locked out, and my reputation further damaged. The next day, however, I found I'd been given new missions, and although there weren't trees in the landing area this time, the target was on a pretty steep slope. Although I realised this was not a suitable landing spot, I thought I'd give it a try, partly out of determination to complete the mission, but also sheer curiosity. My instinct was right. It was not a suitable landing spot, but it didn't stop the guy trying to get in the helicopter. After I regained control and altitude, I passed over the target site to see if he was still around, but couldn't see him. I found a slightly better landing spot at the top of the hill and got out on foot to go and look for him, only to find he was sitting right behind me. I can only assume he really wanted to get off this mountain if was willing to chase a helicopter, with its blades spinning down the side of a mountain and jump in the back like it was a London bus. But the mission still said to land near the target, so I tried walking towards the camp.
Error. Failed to get user sim. Ready to proceed. Captain, we're boarding. We're ready for takeoff.
I think that means it worked, or at least broke it to the point of confusing the sim into thinking it worked. But I got him home and got a decent score, so all's well that ends well, I guess. Despite the increased helicopter support and activities in this new version of the sim, the developers seem to be very plane-orientated, and the helicopters are an afterthought. The Flighseeing company can be either helicopter or plane, but the specialist helicopter companies have been shoved to the end of the list. Once you start your own company, you need an aircraft. And surprise, surprise, you have the choice of 2 planes or 1 helicopter. Fortunately, I quite like the G2. You also need insurance, and based on what I've seen on social media, you get billed for your insurance whether you play the game or not. So if you buy the top level of insurance then go away for a week, you may come back to find you have no money left. So be warned. I'm cheap, however, so I got the basic insurance. You can adjust your fuel before takeoff. As I'm not going far, I don't need a full tank, so don't see the point in carrying the extra weight. In fact, I'm sure I could manage with less than this, but this is my first flight with my new helicopter. My new helicopter's maiden voyage was a Flighseeing mission, and I definitely felt a bit apprehensive knowing that if I damaged or crashed it, I would have to pay for it. Fortunately, the flight went smoothly and nothing broke. The payout is significantly better as you're self-employed and get all the proceeds yourself. However, you do have to pay for maintenance. For the record, the skids were damaged when I bought it, but I couldn't afford to repair them before the mission. Based on what I've seen online, enabling Allow Crew should allow your aircraft to create a passive income when you're not flying it, which hopefully counters the insurance cost. So far, the mission options for helicopters are pretty limited. With search and rescue bugged and passenger transport being incredibly tedious, it looks like I'll be sticking with Flighseeing until I've saved up enough to do some of the other qualifications. The blue gates which show you where to go do make navigating and completing the mission a lot easier, but I think it'd be significantly improved and much more immersive if they concentrated on teaching the player to use the actual navigation equipment properly. And while the tablet has a GPS course on it, which is fairly normal these days, what's on the tablet doesn't always match where the blue gates take you. While there is certainly some fun to be had, there are still lots of bugs to work out, which isn't a big surprise, but there are multiple scenarios where the player is penalised because of a fault in the game, which is going to aggravate an already disgruntled community. If you're working your way through the helicopter career, let me know how you're getting on in the comments. Have you had the same or other issues? If you've made it to the end of the video, you ought to subscribe, maybe even throw in a like. Go on, it's nearly Christmas. Till next time, fly safe.